Everyone at Pacific Grove Memorial thought Kate Reynolds was just another compassionate ER nurse, until the night the Steel Serpents Motorcycle Club discovered that threatening a quiet healer meant facing the wrath of her brother, a legendary Green Beret operator known in military circles only as the Ghost. If you're enjoying this story, make sure to hit subscribe. Tomorrow's story about a small-town librarian who turns out to be an underground fighting champion will blow your mind. The summer heat shimmered off the playground equipment at Oakwood Community Park, casting wavering shadows across the freshly mowed grass. Sarah Mitchell watched her 7-year-old daughter Emma swinging happily, her pigtails flying through the air with each arc. The late afternoon sun painted the Colorado mountains in the distance with streaks of amber and gold, creating a peaceful backdrop that belied the tension building in Sarah's chest. She'd noticed them 20 minutes ago, 3 men who didn't belong in a family park, lounging against an expensive black SUV, their predatory gazes following the children and mothers. Their designer clothes and gold watches seemed out of place among the simple play structures and picnic tables. The tallest one, who she'd mentally dubbed Designer Shades, kept checking his phone while whispering to his companions. Sarah's fingers instinctively tightened around her phone as she watched them approach another young mother, their conversation too quiet to hear, but their body language speaking volumes. The woman hurriedly gathered her children and left, almost running to her car. It was the 3rd time Sarah had witnessed this scene play out in the past week. The park had changed recently. New faces appeared, expensive cars cruised slowly past the playground, and families started disappearing. The local police seemed unconcerned, dismissing complaints about suspicious activities with practiced indifference. But Sarah knew something was wrong. Her years as a social worker had taught her to recognize the signs of organized criminal activity, especially when it involved children. Emma's laughter cut through her dark thoughts, momentarily lifting her spirits. Her daughter was her world, the reason she worked 2 jobs and fought through endless custody battles with her ex-husband. The sun caught the silver locket around Emma's neck, a gift from her Uncle Michael, Sarah's brother, before his last deployment with SEAL Team 6. Sarah checked her phone again, reading Michael's last message. Back stateside. Need to decompress. Will visit soon. That was 3 days ago. She'd hoped he'd arrive today, knowing his presence would help her feel safer, but there was still no word. The rhythmic crunch of expensive shoes on gravel pulled her attention back to the present. Designer Shades was approaching her bench, flanked by his 2 associates. The shorter one had a tribal tattoo snaking up his neck, while the muscular one flexed his hands repeatedly, thick rings glinting on his fingers. Sarah stood, positioning herself between them and the playground. "Beautiful afternoon," Designer Shades said, his smile never reaching his eyes behind the dark lenses. "Your daughter's quite talented on those swings." Sarah's heart raced, but her voice remained steady. "She is, and we're leaving now." "Emma," she called out, not taking her eyes off the men. "Actually," Designer Shades moved closer, dropping his voice. "We need to discuss the park's new management. There's been some concern about unofficial photography happening here. We're implementing a registration system for regular visitors, for safety." The implications made Sarah's blood run cold. She'd seen this before, criminals establishing control over public spaces, using threats and intimidation to create fear and compliance. Her mind raced through options. The park exits were too far, her car was blocked by their SUV, and the few remaining families were already hurrying away. "I don't think so," Sarah replied, her voice stronger than she felt. "This is a public park. If you have concerns, take them to the Parks Department." Designer Shade's smile vanished. "I don't think you understand. This isn't a request. We've noticed you here often, watching." Taking notes on everyone at Pacific Grove Memorial thought Kate Reynolds was just another compassionate ER nurse, until the night the Steel Serpents Motorcycle Club discovered that threatening a quiet healer meant facing the wrath of her brother, a legendary Green Beret operator known in military circles only as the Ghost. If you're enjoying this story, make sure to hit subscribe. Tomorrow's story about a small-town librarian who turns out to be an underground fighting champion will blow your mind. Quick pause. Where in the world are you watching from? The summer heat shimmered off the playground equipment at Oakwood Community Park, casting wavering shadows across the freshly mowed grass. Sarah Mitchell watched her 7-year-old daughter Emma swinging happily, her pigtails flying through the air with each arc. The late afternoon sun painted the Colorado mountains in the distance with streaks of amber and gold, creating a peaceful backdrop that belied the tension building in Sarah's chest. She'd noticed them 20 minutes ago. 3 men who didn't belong in a family park, lounging against an expensive black SUV, their predatory gazes following the children and mothers. Their designer clothes and gold watches seemed out of place among the simple play structures and picnic tables. The tallest one, who she'd mentally dubbed Designer Shades, kept checking his phone while whispering to his companions. Sarah's fingers instinctively tightened around her phone as she watched them approach another young mother, their conversation too quiet to hear but their body language speaking volumes. The woman hurriedly gathered her children and left, almost running to her car. It was the 3rd time Sarah had witnessed this scene play out in the past week. The park had changed recently. New faces appeared, expensive cars cruised slowly past the playground, and families started disappearing. The local police seemed unconcerned, dismissing complaints about suspicious activities with practiced indifference. But Sarah knew something was wrong. Her years as a social worker had taught her to recognize the signs of organized criminal activity, especially when it involved children. Emma's laughter cut through her dark thoughts, momentarily lifting her spirits. Her daughter was her world, the reason she worked 2 jobs and fought through endless custody battles with her ex-husband. The sun caught the silver locket around Emma's neck, a gift from her Uncle Michael, Sarah's brother, before his last deployment with SEAL Team 6. Sarah checked her phone again, reading Michael's last message. Back stateside. Need to decompress. Will visit soon. That was 3 days ago. She'd hoped he'd arrive today, knowing his presence would help her feel safer, but there was still no word. The rhythmic crunch of expensive shoes on gravel pulled her attention back to the present. Designer Shades was approaching her bench, flanked by his 2 associates. The shorter one had a tribal tattoo snaking up his neck, while the muscular one flexed his hands repeatedly, thick rings glinting on his fingers. Sarah stood, positioning herself between them and the playground. Beautiful afternoon, Designer Shades said, his smile never reaching his eyes behind the dark lenses. Your daughter's quite talented on those swings. Sarah's heart raced, but her voice remained steady. She is, and we're leaving now. Emma, she called out, not taking her eyes off the men. Actually, Designer Shades moved closer, dropping his voice. We need to discuss the park's new management. There's been some concern about unofficial photography happening here. We're implementing a registration system for regular visitors, for safety. The implications made Sarah's blood run cold. She'd seen this before, criminals establishing control over public spaces, using threats and intimidation to create fear and compliance. Our phone. It's making certain people uncomfortable. The muscular one moved to circle behind her, but Sarah held her ground. Emma, time to go. Her daughter looked up, finally sensing the tension in her mother's voice. Your daughter's safety is important to us, Designer Shades continued, his tone carrying an unmistakable threat. It would be tragic if anything happened while she was playing. Accidents can happen so quickly. Sarah's hand tightened around her phone, her thumb hovering over the emergency dial button. But before she could respond, a new voice cut through the tension, deep, calm, and carrying an edge of steel that made all 3 men stiffen. I couldn't agree more about safety, the voice said, especially since I've been watching you threaten families here all afternoon. Sarah's heart leapt as a familiar figure stepped into view. Michael Mitchell moved with the fluid grace of a predator, his muscled frame deceptively relaxed. His eyes, hardened by years of combat, scanned the 3 men with cold precision, cataloging threats and vulnerabilities with practiced ease. Designer Shades turned, his hand twitching toward his jacket. This is a private conversation. I suggest you walk away. Sarah saw her brother's slight smile and knew these men had made a serious mistake. They thought they were the predators in this park. They were about to learn otherwise. The sun dipped lower behind the mountains as forces built toward a confrontation that would expose far more than just park bullies. In the playground, Emma paused her swinging, watching her uncle with a mixture of joy and awe, unaware that her family was about to be pulled into something much larger than a simple afternoon confrontation. Michael Mitchell's combat-trained senses cataloged every detail of the scene before him. 3 hostiles, concealed weapons by their stance and jacket adjustments. 2 escape vehicles, the black SUV and a silver sedan partially hidden behind the park's maintenance building. The playground had cleared except for Emma, still watching from the swings, and 2 teenagers trying to appear casual while filming on their phones near the basketball court. 15 years of special operations had taught him to read intentions in micro-expressions, to spot the telltale signs of professionals masquerading as common thugs. Designer Shades carried himself like private military, maybe Blackwater or one of the shadier contractors. The muscular one's hands showed calluses consistent with regular weapons training, while tribal tattoos constantly scanning gaze betrayed tactical awareness. These weren't simple park bullies. The way they'd systematically cleared the area, their coordinated positioning, the practiced intimidation. This was a professional operation. But what would bring this level of muscle to a suburban Colorado park? "Uncle Mike!" Emma called out, starting to run toward him. Michael kept his stance relaxed but raised his hand slightly, a gesture that stopped his niece in her tracks. Sarah had taught her daughter well. Emma recognized the signal they'd practiced for dangerous situations. "Stay on the swings, princess," Michael called back, his voice cheerful despite the tension coiling in his muscles. "I need to talk to these gentlemen first." He turned his attention back to Designer Shades, noting how the man's weight had shifted subtly into a combat stance. "Now, about that registration system you were discussing with my sister." Designer Shades straightened, re-evaluating the situation. Michael saw the moment the man recognized him for what he was. The subtle widening of eyes behind those expensive lenses, the fractional step backward. Military recognizes military, especially the elite ones. "Family," Designer Shades said carefully. "That explains the observation skills. Ms. Mitchell has been very attentive to park activities lately. We were merely expressing concern about proper supervision protocols." Sarah stepped forward, her voice steady. "They've been clearing out families, Mike. 3 this afternoon alone. Last week I saw them photographing children. When I reported it, the police said they'd look into it, but nothing happened." Michael nodded, pieces clicking into place. The expensive vehicles, the professional muscle, the police indifference, it fit patterns he'd seen before in operations overseas. Human trafficking organizations often started by establishing control over public spaces, documenting potential targets while intimidating witnesses into silence. "Here's what's going to happen," Michael said, his voice dropping to a register that made the muscular man take an involuntary step back. "You're going to leave this park, you're going to stay away from my sister and niece, and you're going to tell whoever you work for that this location is now off limits." Tribal Tattoo laughed, but it sounded forced. "You don't give orders here, friend. You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Actually, I do," Michael replied. "Private military background, probably ex-Blackwater. Working for someone with serious resources given those watches and the custom leather holsters you're trying to hide. 3-man intimidation team using standard trafficking reconnaissance tactics. The question is, do you know who you're dealing with?" Designer Shades went very still. "Why don't you enlighten us?" "Navy SEAL Team 6 recently retired, and I'm very, very good at recognizing threats to national security." Michael smiled, but it was the kind of smile that made smart people run. "So here's your choice. Leave now, or find out exactly how we deal with hostile forces in enclosed environments." The tension stretched like a wire about to snap. In the distance, Emma had stopped swinging, her small face serious as she watched the confrontation. Sarah stood her ground beside her brother, her phone now openly recording the encounter. Designer Shades studied Michael for a long moment before nodding slightly. "We're leaving, for now. But this isn't over." "It never is," Michael agreed pleasantly. "Oh, and one more thing." He gestured toward the teenagers with their phones. "You've been recorded threatening a child in a public park. If anything happens to my family, anything at all, that footage goes to every law enforcement agency and news outlet in Colorado, along with everything else my sister has documented over the past week. The three men retreated to their vehicles, trying to maintain an appearance of control. Michael memorized license plates and identifying details, his mind already planning countermeasures and intelligence gathering. As the SUV pulled away, he heard his sister let out a shaky breath. "Emma, come here, sweetie," Sarah called. The little girl ran to them, wrapping her arms around her uncle's waist even as she reached for her mother's hand. Michael hugged his niece while keeping his eyes on the departing vehicles, knowing this was just the beginning. The sun had dipped below the mountains, casting long shadows across the empty playground. In the distance, a police siren wailed, but Michael knew they wouldn't respond. Something was very wrong in this quiet suburban community, and his protective instincts, honed through years of combat and covert operations, told him the real fight was just beginning. The kitchen in Sarah's modest suburban home felt too small for Michael's restless energy as he paced, processing the day's events. Emma had finally fallen asleep upstairs, exhausted from the excitement and tension at the park. Through the window, he noticed a dark sedan cruise past for the third time in an hour. Surveillance, professional but not trying too hard to hide it. "They've been watching the house," Sarah said quietly, setting down 2 cups of coffee. "Different cars, but regular patterns. Started about 2 weeks ago, around the same time the park situation began." She pulled out her phone, showing him dozens of documented sightings, times, and license plate numbers. Michael studied the data, impressed by his sister's thoroughness. "You should have called me sooner. You were deployed, and honestly, I didn't know how deep this went until recently." Sarah pulled up more photos on her laptop, expensive cars at the park, men in suits watching children, teenage girls being approached by well-dressed women. Last month, 3 girls disappeared from the high school. Police claimed they were runaways, but their parents say they were being photographed at the park days before. A sharp knock at the front door made them both tense. Michael moved silently to the security panel he'd installed years ago, checking the camera feed. A woman stood on the porch, mid-30s, athletic build, badge clipped to her belt. "Detective Claire Rodriguez," Sarah identified her. "One of the few honest cops left in town. She's been trying to investigate the disappearances but keeps hitting roadblocks." Michael opened the door, studying the detective with practiced scrutiny. Her stance and alert eyes marked her as competent, though the dark circles under her eyes spoke of exhaustion and frustration. "Ms. Mitchell." Rodriguez nodded to Sarah, then turned to Michael. "You must be the brother. Word travels fast about what happened at the park today. Mind if I come in?" Inside, Rodriguez declined coffee but got straight to business. "The men you encountered, they work for Marcus Kane, ex-military turned private security consultant, but that's just the surface. His company, Aegis Solutions, has contracts with half the police departments in the state for community safety consulting." Michael's jaw tightened. "Including this department?" "Especially this department," Rodriguez's voice carried controlled anger. 6 months ago, Kane's organization started implementing enhanced security measures in public spaces. Parks, schools, community centers. They claimed it was about preventing crime, protecting children. Instead, families started feeling watched, intimidated. Then the disappearances began. Sarah spread photos across the table, missing person reports, surveillance images, official documents. 7 teenagers in the past 3 months, all previously photographed in places Kane's men monitored. But every investigation gets shut down by department brass. "Kane's got the chief in his pocket," Rodriguez confirmed, "along with the mayor and half the city council. Anyone who pushes too hard gets transferred, demoted, or worse. 2 weeks ago, my partner was investigating a lead at one of Kane's warehouses. Next day, his daughter's school reported her being photographed by security consultants." He backed off immediately. Michael processed this information with cold efficiency, recognizing the patterns. Human trafficking operation using private security contracts as cover. The park surveillance was target selection and intimidation. Keep the community afraid. Control law enforcement through corruption and threats, then pick off vulnerable targets with impunity. "We think it's bigger than just our town." Rodriguez pulled out more files. "Similar patterns in other communities where Aegis operates. Always the same sequence: security contracts, surveillance, disappearances. Conservative estimate puts the number of missing teenagers at over 30 across 3 states. A text alert buzzed on Michael's phone. His former SEAL team member, Jake "Ghost" Wilson, had run the license plates from the park. The data made his blood run cold. "Kane's not the top," Michael said, showing them the intelligence. His company's owned by a shell corporation linked to the Constantine Group. Russian organized crime, specialized in human trafficking through legitimate business fronts. They've been trying to establish operations in the U.S., using private security companies as cover. Sarah's face paled. So today, at the park, they were documenting potential targets, Michael confirmed grimly. The registration system was a cover for cataloging children. Kane's men clear out witnesses, intimidate families, while building a database of vulnerable targets. Local police protection makes it almost foolproof. Rodriguez leaned forward, her voice intense. "I've been building a case for months, but I can't trust anyone in the department. Now that you've confronted Kane's men directly, they'll either back off or escalate," Michael finished. "Make an example to maintain control through fear." His phone buzzed again, another car passing the house. Different, but with the same surveillance pattern. "They're watching us right now," Sarah whispered, instinctively glancing toward Emma's room upstairs. Michael's combat-honed instincts shifted into high gear. Kane's organization would respond to the park confrontation, probably sooner rather than later. They couldn't risk their operation being exposed, especially with its connections to international organized crime. His sister and niece were now prime targets. "Detective," he turned to Rodriguez, "how many clean cops can you trust?" "Absolutely trust. 3, maybe 4. The rest are either compromised or too scared to act." Michael nodded, already formulating plans. "Get them ready. Kane's going to move soon, and when he does, we'll be ready. But first, we need to get Sarah and Emma somewhere safe." Through the window, another unmarked car rolled past, its occupants hidden behind tinted glass. The quiet suburban street suddenly felt like a battleground, and Michael Mitchell was preparing for war. Kane and his organization were about to learn why threatening a SEAL's family was a fatal mistake. The safe house Detective Rodriguez arranged sat on the outskirts of town, a modest ranch home surrounded by enough open space to make covert approach difficult. Michael watched Sarah and Emma settle in, his sister maintaining a brave face while his niece treated it like an adventure. Outside, the mountain sunset painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, but Michael's attention was focused on the dust trail approaching from the main road. "Company?" he spoke into his comm unit. "Jake Ghost." Wilson's voice crackled back. 3 vehicles. Same models from the park. Kane's making his move earlier than expected. Michael had known Kane wouldn't wait long to respond. The organization couldn't risk letting their confrontation go unanswered. It would show weakness, encourage others to resist. But the speed and boldness of this response suggested something else. Desperation. "Sarah, get Emma to the basement," Michael ordered, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had commanded SEAL teams through countless operations. "Detective, your people in position?" Rodriguez checked her tactical radio. 2 unmarked units on the back road, ready to move on your signal, but we're outgunned if this goes hot. The approaching vehicles, 2 black SUVs and a sedan, stopped at the edge of the property. Michael counted 8 men emerging, all carrying themselves with military precision. Designer shades from the park led them, but there was a new figure. Tall, distinguished-looking, wearing an expensive suit despite the rural setting. Marcus Kane himself had come to deliver the message. "Stay inside," Michael instructed Rodriguez and Sarah. "Let's see what message they're bringing before we show our full hand." He stepped onto the front porch, deliberately casual, letting the dying sunlight silhouette him. His combat gear was hidden under a loose jacket, but the way he carried himself made Kane's men instinctively spread out into defensive positions. "Mr. Mitchell," Kane called out, his voice cultured and confident. "I apologize for the late visit, but after today's unfortunate incident, I felt a personal conversation was warranted." Michael noted the positions of Kane's men, identifying weapons and angles of fire. His own backup was well concealed. Ghost in a sniper position on the ridge, Rodriguez's trusted officers waiting in the shadows, all coordinated through encrypted comms. But Kane didn't need to know that yet. "Nothing unfortunate about it," Michael replied. "Just a concerned citizen protecting children from suspicious activity in a public park." Kane smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Let's be direct. You're interfering with a legitimate security operation. Your military background is impressive. SEAL Team 6, multiple commendations, specialized in anti-trafficking operations. You of all people should understand the need for robust community protection." Funny definition of protection, Michael's voice hardened. "Looks more like surveillance and intimidation to me, almost like you're cataloging targets." Kane's smile vanished. "Dangerous accusations, Mr. Mitchell. The kind that could have serious consequences. For you, your sister, your charming niece. Children are so vulnerable these days." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Michael felt a cold fury building, but kept his voice steady. "You're right about one thing, Kane. I do have experience with trafficking operations, know how to spot them, how to shut them down, and what happens to the people running them." "A word of advice." Kane stepped forward, his men tensing. "Take your family and leave town. Tonight. Whatever you think you know, whatever evidence you believe you have, it's not worth the risk. I'd hate to see anything happen to that sweet little girl." Michael's response was cut off by a sudden commotion from one of the SUVs. A figure burst out. A teenage girl, maybe 15, making a desperate break for freedom. One of Kane's men grabbed her, but she fought with desperate strength. The pieces clicked into place. They hadn't come just to deliver a threat. They were in the middle of an operation. Michael moved with explosive speed. The first guard went down before he could raise his weapon, a precise strike collapsing his throat. The second managed to draw his gun but found it kicked from his grip. Designer shades fired, the shot going wide as Michael closed the distance and drove an elbow into his solar plexus. Kane's men responded with professional coordination, but they weren't prepared for a SEAL operating at close quarters. Michael flowed between them like water, each movement ending in devastating impact. Ghost's sniper fire cracked from the ridge, forcing the remaining guards to dive for cover. Rodriguez's units roared in from their hidden positions, cutting off escape routes. The teenage girl ran toward the house, where Sarah emerged to hustle her to safety. Kane himself stood watching the chaos with cold fury, reaching into his jacket. "Now we have a problem," Kane said, drawing a pistol. But Michael was already moving. The gun went flying, followed by the sharp crack of breaking fingers. Kane found himself face down in the dirt, arm locked behind his back at a painful angle. "The real problem," Michael growled, "is thinking you could threaten my family and walk away." He increased pressure on Kane's arm until the man gasped. "The trafficking operation ends now, or next time we meet I won't be so gentle." Police sirens wailed in the distance, not Rodriguez's people, but regular units responding to gunfire. Kane's remaining men fled to their vehicles, leaving their boss in the dust. Michael released Kane with a final warning squeeze. "Run back to your Russian friends," he said quietly. "Tell them what happened here. And understand this. I've got evidence of everything. One move against my family and it all goes public. Every operation, every connection, every compromised official." Kane stood slowly, brushing dirt from his expensive suit. His cultured facade had cracked, revealing the predator beneath. "This isn't over, Mitchell." "No," Michael agreed, watching him retreat. "It's just beginning." The teenage girl was safe. Kane's initial show of force had failed, but Michael knew this was only the first skirmish. The real war was about to begin, and it would take more than combat skills to protect his family from what was coming. The safe house hummed with tense activity as Detective Rodriguez interviewed the rescued teenager. Lisa Cooper, 15 years old, had been missing for 3 days. Her story confirmed their worst fears about Kane's operation. Michael watched through the window as dawn painted the mountains, his mind processing the implications of what they'd learned. "They took 4 of us." Lisa's voice trembled as she spoke to Rodriguez. "From different towns. They had files on all of us. Photos from parks, schools, Our daily routines. Said they'd been watching for weeks. Knew exactly when to grab us. She wrapped the blanket Sarah had given her tighter around her shoulders. The others? They were moving them somewhere else when I got away. Sarah sat beside the girl, her social worker training evident in her gentle support. Emma slept upstairs, unaware of the darkness they'd stumbled into. Michael's phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Ghost, who was running surveillance on Kane's known properties. Heavy movement at their warehouse district, Ghost reported. They're clearing out, moving fast. Multiple vehicles, looks like they're relocating their whole operation. Rodriguez joined Michael at the window, her face grim. Lisa's confirmed at least 20 other girls in their system. Kane's organization identifies targets, documents their routines, then uses the private security contracts to coordinate abductions. The police protection makes it almost perfect. Any reports get buried or dismissed as runaways. Michael's jaw tightened. And now they're moving everything, trying to protect their infrastructure. He turned to the detective. We need to move fast before they disappear completely. Sarah approached, holding her laptop. I've been analyzing the data we gathered. Kane's company, Aegis Solutions, has contracts with 12 other communities across 3 states. Same pattern everywhere. Security consultations followed by disappearances. But look at this. She pulled up financial records. The money trail leads to offshore accounts linked to Russian shell corporations. The Constantine Group, Michael nodded. They're expanding their European trafficking operations into America, using private security companies as legitimate fronts. Kane's just their local manager. Rodriguez's phone buzzed, one of her trusted officers. Her face darkened as she listened. We've got trouble. Chief just called an emergency department meeting. They're implementing new security protocols across the city, setting up checkpoints, increased patrols. They're looking for Lisa, Sarah realized, using police resources to trap us. Michael's combat instincts kicked into high gear. They'll lock down the city, control all movement. We need to get ahead of this. He turned to Rodriguez. How many officers in that meeting aren't compromised? Maybe a dozen. The rest are either on Kane's payroll or too scared to resist. Get word to the clean ones. When Kane makes his move, we'll need them. Michael pulled up satellite imagery of the warehouse district on his phone. Ghost, what's the activity level at the main facility? Heavy equipment moving in and out. They're loading shipping containers. Standard trafficking transport setup. Wait. Ghost's voice sharpened. New arrival. Black Mercedes, diplomatic plates. Looks like Kane's got company. Michael accessed the surveillance feed Ghost had hacked. The figure emerging from the Mercedes made his blood run cold. Victor Constantine himself, the organization's second in command. Sarah looked up from comforting Lisa. Why would someone that high level come here? Because we didn't just disrupt their local operation, Michael realized. We exposed their whole U.S. expansion strategy. Kane's failure put their entire network at risk. He studied the footage of Constantine, tall, aristocratic, with the cold eyes of a predator. They're not just moving their operation, they're cleaning house. Rodriguez's phone buzzed again. The color drained from her face as she listened. 3 of my trusted officers just got reassigned to desk duty. Chief's consolidating control, putting Kane's people in key positions. They're isolating us, Michael noted grimly. Cutting off our resources before they move. His phone lit up with another message from Ghost. Multiple vehicles moving out from the warehouse. Combat teams. Professional gear. They're not running. They're hunting. Sarah hugged Lisa closer, her eyes moving instinctively toward Emma's room. What's our play? Michael's mind raced through options, evaluating threats and assets. Kane's organization was powerful, but their aggressive response revealed desperation. They couldn't risk their operation being exposed, couldn't allow any witnesses to survive. But desperation meant mistakes. First, we get you, Emma and Lisa, to a secure location, out of their reach. He turned to Rodriguez. Can your clean officers provide escort? The detective nodded. I've got a safe house in the next county. Department doesn't know about it. Good. Ghost will coordinate security. Michael checked his weapons. Meanwhile, we're going to use their desperation against them. Kane and Constantine think they're hunting us. Time to show them what it's like to be the prey." Sarah recognized the look in her brother's eyes, the same expression he'd had before dangerous missions. "What are you planning?" "Kane's organization works through fear and corruption. They think they own this city, control every move." Michael's voice hardened. "We're going to take that control away. Ghost has evidence of their entire operation, every compromised official, every trafficking route. One phone call sends it all to federal authorities. They'll try to stop us," Rodriguez warned. "Count on it." Michael smiled grimly. "That's exactly what we want. Sometimes the best way to dismantle a corrupt system is to let it destroy itself." Outside, the mountain sunrise painted the sky blood red. In the warehouse district, Kane and Constantine prepared their forces for a hunt, but they had forgotten the first rule of combat: never underestimate a SEAL protecting his family. The real war was about to begin, and Michael Mitchell was going to teach them why some predators should never be cornered. Michael converted the safe house's basement into an operations center, walls covered with surveillance photos and maps. Ghost had patched into traffic cameras across the city, tracking Kane's forces as they established checkpoints and search patterns. Lisa sat with Sarah, marking locations where she'd been held, while Rodriguez coordinated with her remaining trusted officers through encrypted channels. "They held us here first," Lisa pointed to a warehouse on the industrial outskirts. "But they moved us 3 times in 3 days. Never stayed in one place too long." Her hand trembled as she marked the locations. "The last place. That's where the others still are, the ones they're planning to move tonight." Sarah squeezed the girl's shoulder supportively while taking notes. Her social worker experience helped her gather crucial details without re-traumatizing Lisa. "Did you hear them mention where they were taking them?" "Something about a processing center in Nevada. They said a special client was coming to inspect the merchandise." Lisa's voice cracked on the last word. Michael's jaw tightened as he added the information to their intelligence board. Ghost's voice crackled through the comm system. "Got movement at all 3 locations Lisa identified. They're clearing evidence, moving equipment. Constantine's people are thorough. Professional cleanup crews." Rodriguez hung up her secure phone, face grim. "Just lost contact with 2 more clean officers. Department's conducting an internal review. Kane's people are isolating anyone not on their payroll." Michael studied the pattern of locations on the map, his tactical mind processing the information. "They're consolidating their operation, removing traces of their previous activities while preparing for a major transport." He pointed to shipping manifests Ghost had obtained. "These containers are registered to a shipping company owned by the Constantine Group. They're moving their victims out through commercial transport networks." Sarah looked up from her laptop where she'd been analyzing financial data. "The company's legitimate on paper. They move everything from electronics to agricultural products. Perfect cover for human trafficking. Local police provide escort under the guise of secure transport services." "Classic organization structure," Michael noted. "Multiple layers of legitimate business hiding criminal operations. Kane's security contracts provide surveillance and abduction teams. Local police ensure no one investigates. Shipping companies handle transport. Each layer protected by official contracts and documentation." Ghost's voice cut in urgently. "New development. Just intercepted department communications. They're implementing a citywide curfew tonight. Chief's calling it a public safety measure due to criminal activity. They're clearing the streets," Rodriguez realized, "making sure no one witnesses the transport operation." Michael nodded grimly. "How many girls did you see at the last location, Lisa?" The teenager hugged herself tightly. "At least 15. Some had been there longer than me. They kept talking about a big shipment. Said the client wanted to inspect the complete inventory before processing." Sarah's face hardened at the clinical terminology. Her phone buzzed with an alert from her Child Protection Services network. 3 more teenagers reported missing in the last 24 hours. All fit the same profile: young, vulnerable, mostly from single-parent homes or foster care. "Building their inventory," Michael's voice carried cold fury. "Replacing the ones Lisa helped expose." He turned to Rodriguez. "What resources do we have left?" The detective checked her secure phone. "4 officers I trust absolutely. 2 dispatch operators who can feed us department movements. Maybe 3 federal contacts, but they'll take hours to mobilize." "We don't have hours." Michael pointed to the shipping schedules. "These containers move out at midnight. Once they're on the road with police escort, any intervention risks the hostages." Ghost's surveillance feed showed more activity at Kane's warehouse complex. "Multiple security teams deploying. They're establishing a perimeter around the transport route. These aren't local muscle, professional combat teams. Probably Constantine's personal security force." Michael began assembling tactical gear, his movements precise and methodical. "Kane's people control the streets. Constantine's teams guard the transport. They think they've created a perfect corridor for moving their merchandise out of the city." Sarah recognized her brother's tone. He'd identified a weakness in the enemy's plan. "What are you seeing?" "They're focused on controlling ground movement, watching the streets." Michael pulled up satellite imagery of the city. "But they've forgotten something crucial about this area." He pointed to the abandoned mining tunnels running beneath the industrial district. "There's more than one way to move through hostile territory." Rodriguez studied the tunnel network. "Those mines haven't been used in decades. No one even remembers they exist." "Exactly." Michael's smile held no warmth. "Kane's people think they own this city above ground. Time to show them what happens when you fight a seal in his element. Underground, in the dark, where all their fancy equipment and corrupt police mean nothing." He laid out tactical maps, marking entry points and emergency exits. "Ghost, get me detailed scans of those tunnel systems. Rodriguez, we need your clean officers ready to move on signal, but they stay above ground, visible, keeping Kane's people focused on street level." "What's the play?" Ghost asked. "They're expecting a direct confrontation. Probably think we'll try to intercept the transport convoy." Michael checked his weapons and night vision gear. "Instead, we're going to hit them where they feel safest. The warehouse where they're holding the girls. While their security teams are spread out watching the streets, we come up right under their feet." Sarah watched her brother prepare for combat, recognizing the focused intensity that had kept him alive through countless missions. "The tunnels will be dangerous, unstable after all these years." "Good," Michael replied coldly. "That means Kane's people won't expect anyone to use them. Too risky, too unpredictable. But that's the thing about SEALs. We specialize in impossible insertions. While they're watching the streets for threats, we'll be right beneath them, turning their own security against them." Ghost's voice carried grudging admiration. "Classic SEAL operation. Hit them where they think they're strongest, using the environment as a weapon." Michael finished his preparations, checking communication gear one final time. "Kane and Constantine think they're hunting us. Time to teach them why you don't corner a predator in its own territory. Tonight, we're taking their operation apart, from the ground up." Outside, the sun began to set behind the mountains. In 6 hours, Kane's transport operation would begin. But in the tunnels beneath the city, a SEAL was preparing to remind them why some shadows hide deadlier predators than others. The abandoned mining tunnels beneath Pacific City hadn't seen human activity in decades, but tonight they crawled with deadly purpose. Michael Mitchell moved like a ghost through the darkness, his night vision goggles revealing the twisted maze of passages that would lead him beneath Kane's warehouse complex. Behind him, Ghost maintained their distance markers, while 2 of Rodriguez's most trusted officers, Jenkins and Martinez, followed with practiced stealth. "Motion sensors show all clear in this section," Ghost's voice whispered through their encrypted comms. "Kane's people never bothered securing the lower levels. They don't think anyone would be crazy enough to use these tunnels." Michael smiled grimly as he checked his tactical display. The building's foundation plans, overlaid with thermal imaging from Ghost's drones, showed 15 heat signatures in the warehouse's secure area, matching Lisa's count of captives. Guard positions were marked in red, their patrol patterns now predictable after hours of surveillance. "Rodriguez, status on street level?" Michael sub-vocalized through his throat mic. "Kane's people have locked down 6 blocks around the warehouse," the detective reported from her observation post. Police checkpoints at every major intersection. They're getting ready to move their cargo. The last word carried controlled fury. Sarah's voice came through next, monitoring communications from the backup safe house where she protected Emma and Lisa. Ghost's intercepts show the transport trucks arriving in 90 minutes. Constantine's doing final inventory before the move. Michael paused at a junction, consulting the mineral survey maps they'd obtained. The original miners had driven their tunnels right up to the bedrock beneath the warehouse district, searching for gold veins. Those same tunnels would now let them bypass Kane's surface security entirely. Jenkins, Martinez, prep the charges here and here. He marked positions on their tactical displays. If we need an emergency exit, we'll make our own door. The two officers began setting demolition charges while Michael and Ghost pushed forward. The tunnel narrowed, decades of shifting earth creating tight squeezes that would have triggered claustrophobia in less experienced operators. But Michael had trained for exactly these conditions, and Ghost had earned his nickname through similar infiltrations. Approaching target point Alpha, Ghost reported. Thermal shows 2 guards directly above us, stationed by the main holding area. Michael checked his watch. Rodriguez, time to create our diversion. Above ground, carefully orchestrated chaos erupted. Rodriguez's clean officers, coordinating with Ghost's hackers, triggered emergency calls across the city. Reports of shots fired, suspicious vehicles, and potential trafficking activity flooded dispatch, all carefully placed to draw Kane's patrols away from the warehouse district. They're responding, Rodriguez confirmed. Kane's mobile teams are being pulled to multiple locations. Even dirty cops have to maintain appearances. Michael reached the position directly beneath the warehouse's sub-basement. Ghost's thermal imaging showed the captives clustered in a storage area above, with guards posted at regular intervals. More importantly, it showed the building's vulnerable points: support pillars, utility connections, and the weak spots where old mining operations had undermined the foundation. Kane and Constantine are still in the office level, Sarah reported, monitoring surveillance feeds. They're agitated about the police calls. Constantine's demanding the transport schedule be moved up. Perfect, Michael whispered. The more pressure they feel, the more mistakes they'll make. Ghost, start the next phase. Throughout the warehouse district, carefully planted devices began disrupting electronic security systems. Cameras failed, motion sensors triggered false alarms, and communication channels filled with static. Kane's security team scrambled to address the technical failures, unaware that each response was pulling them further from their primary objective. They're spreading their forces thin, Ghost observed. Too many distractions, not enough manpower to check everything. Michael reached their breach point, where the tunnel opened into a maintenance shaft that connected to the warehouse's utility systems. The original builders had never considered someone might approach from below. A fatal oversight. Martinez, Jenkins, in position? Both officers confirmed their readiness at the backup exit points. Rodriguez, status on Kane's quick reaction force? Engaged with false alarms on the east side. Response time to the warehouse is now 8 minutes minimum. Michael began assembling his breaching kit while Ghost set up their electronic countermeasures. Above them, the thermal display showed guards responding to the security disruptions, their movements becoming increasingly erratic as systems failed across the facility. Sarah, what's the situation with Kane and Constantine? They're splitting up, his sister reported. Kane's heading to coordinate with the transport teams. Constantine's staying to supervise the inventory check. Her voice hardened. They're starting to move the girls into shipping containers. Michael's jaw tightened. Time to introduce some real chaos. Ghost, hit them with everything. Across the warehouse complex, Ghost's electronic warfare package unleashed digital mayhem. Emergency systems activated, plunging sections into darkness as power relays faltered. Backup generators kicked in, only to fail as surge protectors registered phantom overloads. Communication systems crossed frequencies, filling security channels with overlapping confusion. Multiple teams responding to system failures, Rodriguez reported. Their security cordon is collapsing. Kane's en route back to the warehouse. He knows something's wrong. Michael finished his final equipment check. The next few minutes would determine everything. Rodriguez, have your people ready to move on my signal. If this works, You'll have about 5 minutes to get the girls to transport. If it doesn't, he let the implications hang. We'll be ready, the detective promised. Ghost's thermal display showed the guard positions in chaos, responding to multiple system failures. More importantly, it showed Constantine moving toward the holding area, probably intending to secure his merchandise personally. Time to remind them why you don't cage people in our city, Michael said coldly. Ghost, breach on my mark. The explosion, when it came, was precisely calculated. Not the massive blast Kane's people might have expected, but a series of targeted charges that hit key structural points in the sub-basement. Support pillars, already weakened by decades of mining activity, shifted just enough to send tremors through the building's foundation. Alarms blared as emergency systems detected the structural stress. Guards rushed to investigate the source of the tremors, leaving only minimal security with the captives. In the confusion, Michael and Ghost were already moving through the breach, emerging from the utility shaft like wraiths in the emergency lighting. The first guard never saw the strike that rendered him unconscious. The second managed to reach for his radio before Ghost's taser dropped him. Michael moved through the shadows with lethal efficiency, years of special operations experience turning him into a ghost among the flickering emergency lights. Constantine's approaching the holding area, Sarah warned. Kane's 3 minutes out with reinforcements. Michael reached the secure door to the holding area just as Ghost's next electronic attack hit. Emergency releases activated across the facility, magnetic locks disengaging as safety systems detected phantom fire threats. The door clicked open just as Constantine appeared at the far end of the corridor. The Russian's eyes widened in recognition, his hand moving toward a concealed weapon, but Michael was already in motion, closing the distance with explosive speed. Constantine managed to draw his pistol before a precision strike sent it flying. The Russian was good. His counterstrike would have incapacitated a lesser opponent. But he wasn't fighting a normal adversary. Michael moved through Constantine's defenses like water, each strike targeting nerve clusters and joint locks practiced through thousands of repetitions. The Russian's professional combat training met SEAL close-quarters mastery and found itself wanting. Within seconds, Constantine lay unconscious, secured with his own zip ties. Holding area clear, Ghost reported, already working to free the captives. 15 girls, all alive, mostly in shock, but mobile. Michael secured their exit route while Ghost coordinated with Rodriguez's teams on the surface. The girls emerged from their makeshift prison, fear warring with hope as they realized rescue was real. Kane's team is 1 minute out, Sarah warned. They've figured out something's wrong, switching to tactical frequencies. Michael activated their backup plan. The charges Jenkins and Martinez had planted in the tunnel system detonated in sequence, carefully calculated to cause maximum disruption with minimum structural damage. The entire warehouse district seemed to shudder as decades-old mining tunnels collapsed in strategic locations. All surface teams move in now, Michael commanded. Rodriguez's clean officers converged on the warehouse, their approach covered by the chaos of collapsing tunnels and failing infrastructure. Ghost led the rescued girls toward the preset evacuation routes while Michael stayed to deal with Kane. The security team burst in with professional precision, but found themselves targeting shadows. Emergency strobes and failing systems transformed the warehouse into a maze of shifting lights and uncertain footing. Michael moved among them like a predator, each strike precise and devastating. Kane himself held back, directing his men with experienced caution, but he'd forgotten the cardinal rule of close-quarters combat: never let the enemy choose the battlefield. Tonight, the warehouse had become Michael's killing ground, and Kane's tactical superiority meant nothing in an environment crafted for his destruction. Target groups reaching extraction points, Rodriguez reported. Ghost has 12 girls in transport, 3 more with Martinez's team. Michael allowed himself a cold smile as he approached Kane's position. The security contractor had backed himself into a corner, trying to maintain sight lines in the strobing darkness. His remaining men were down or desperately calling for backup that wouldn't arrive in time. "It's over, Kane," Michael's voice seemed to come from everywhere in the fractured acoustics. "Your operation is done. Constantine's captured, your merchandise is gone, and every bit of evidence is already uploaded to federal authorities. Kane's response was a burst of gunfire that hit nothing but shadows. You think this ends here? The organization is bigger than this facility, bigger than this city. We'll rebuild, start over somewhere else. There's always a market, always corrupt officials willing to look the other way. Not this time. Michael emerged from the darkness behind Kane, his strike already in motion. The security contractor's combat reflexes were excellent. He managed to turn and fire twice before Michael's attack connected. But excellent wasn't enough against a SEAL fighting to protect family. Kane went down hard. His G support pillars, already weakened by decades of mining activity, shifted just enough to send tremors through the building's foundation. Alarms blared as emergency systems detected the structural stress. Guards rushed to investigate the source of the tremors, leaving only minimal security with the captives. In the confusion, Michael and Ghost were already moving through the breach, emerging from the utility shaft like wraiths in the emergency lighting. The first guard never saw the strike that rendered him unconscious. The second managed to reach for his radio before Ghost's taser dropped him. Michael moved through the shadows with lethal efficiency, years of special operations experience turning him into a ghost among the flickering emergency lights. Constantine's approaching the holding area, Sarah warned. Kane's 3 minutes out with reinforcements. Michael reached the secure door to the holding area just as Ghost's next electronic attack hit. Emergency releases activated across the facility, magnetic locks disengaging as safety systems detected phantom fire threats. The door clicked open just as Constantine appeared at the far end of the corridor. The Russian's eyes widened in recognition, his hand moving toward a concealed weapon. But Michael was already in motion, closing the distance with explosive speed. Constantine managed to draw his pistol before a precision strike sent it flying. The Russian was good. His counterstrike would have incapacitated a lesser opponent. But he wasn't fighting a normal adversary. Michael moved through Constantine's defenses like water, each strike targeting nerve clusters and joint locks practiced through thousands of repetitions. The Russian's professional combat training met SEAL close-quarters mastery and found itself wanting. Within seconds, Constantine lay unconscious, secured with his own zip ties. Holding area clear, Ghost reported, already working to free the captives. 15 girls, all alive, mostly in shock but mobile. Michael secured their exit route while Ghost coordinated with Rodriguez's teams on the surface. The girls emerged from their makeshift prison, fear warring with hope as they realized rescue was real. Kane's team is 1 minute out, Sarah warned. They've figured out something's wrong, switching to tactical frequencies. Michael activated their backup plan. The charges Jenkins and Martinez had planted in the tunnel system detonated in sequence, carefully calculated to cause maximum disruption with minimum structural damage. The entire warehouse district seemed to shudder as decades-old mining tunnels collapsed in strategic locations. All surface teams, move in now, Michael commanded. Rodriguez's clean officers converged on the warehouse, their approach covered by the chaos of collapsing tunnels and failing infrastructure. Ghost led the rescued girls toward the preset evacuation routes, while Michael stayed to deal with Kane. The security team burst in with professional precision, but found themselves targeting shadows. Emergency strobes and failing systems transformed the warehouse into a maze of shifting lights and uncertain footing. Michael moved among them like a predator, each strike precise and devastating. Kane himself held back, directing his men with experienced caution, but he'd forgotten the cardinal rule of close-quarters combat: never let the enemy choose the battlefield. Tonight, the warehouse had become Michael's killing ground, and Kane's tactical superiority meant nothing in an environment crafted for his destruction. Target groups reaching extraction points, Rodriguez reported. Ghost has 12 girls in transport, 3 more with Martinez's team. Michael allowed himself a cold smile as he approached Kane's position. The security contractor had backed himself into a corner, trying to maintain sight lines in the strobing darkness. His remaining men were down or desperately calling for backup that wouldn't arrive in time. "It's over, Kane." Michael's voice seemed to come from everywhere in the fractured acoustics. "Your operation is done. Constantine's captured, your merchandise is gone. and every bit of evidence is already uploaded to federal authorities. Kane's response was a burst of gunfire that hit nothing but shadows. You think this ends here? The organization is bigger than this facility, bigger than this city. We'll rebuild, start over somewhere else. There's always a market, always corrupt officials willing to look the other way. Not this time. Michael emerged from the darkness behind Kane, his strike already in motion. The security contractor's combat reflexes were excellent. He managed to turn and fire twice before Michael's attack connected, UN skittering away across the concrete. Michael secured him efficiently, years of practice evident in every movement. Your entire operation is exposed, Michael said quietly. Every official you bought, every transport route, every shell company. Ghost's been feeding it all to federal agencies for hours. By morning, arrests will be starting across 3 states. The sound of police sirens filled the air. Not Kane's corrupt officers, but state police and federal tactical teams Rodriguez had kept in reserve. The warehouse district lit up with emergency lights as the official response finally arrived. This is just one operation, Kane spat, defiant even in defeat. There are always others, always more profit to be made. Michael leaned close, his voice carrying the cold promise of absolute certainty. Then we'll hunt them too. Every trafficker, every corrupt cop, every piece of filth that preys on children. And they'll learn what you learned tonight. Some predators should never be crossed. Rodriguez's teams secured the scene as federal agents swarmed the warehouse complex. The rescued girls were already en route to medical care and reunion with their families. Kane and Constantine would face federal trafficking charges, their operation dismantled and their corruption exposed. In the safe house across town, Sarah held Emma close while Lisa finally slept. Nightmares kept at bay by the knowledge that her captors would never hurt anyone again. The war wasn't over. There would always be other battles against those who preyed on the innocent. But tonight, in this city, the shadows had fought back, and the predators had learned to fear the dark. 3 months after the warehouse raid, Sarah Mitchell stood in her backyard watching Emma play with her friends. The autumn air carried the crisp scent of fallen leaves, and the Colorado mountains painted the horizon in shades of gold and red. It seemed impossible that just 90 days ago, their quiet suburban life had been shattered by Kane's trafficking operation. "Mom, watch this," Emma called out, performing an elaborate cartwheel that sent her pigtails flying. Sarah smiled, marveling at children's resilience. Her daughter had processed the dangerous events as an exciting adventure where Uncle Mike played hero, which, in many ways, was exactly what had happened. Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from Detective Rodriguez. "Final sentencing today. Thought you'd want to know." Inside her home office, Sarah opened her laptop to review the case files she'd helped build. The evidence Ghost had gathered, combined with Lisa's testimony and the rescued girls' statements, had created an airtight federal case. Kane and Constantine's operation hadn't just been dismantled, it had been obliterated. "Quite a scoreboard," Michael's voice came from the doorway. He'd appeared silently, a habit Sarah had never quite gotten used to. 37 trafficking convictions, 22 corrupt officials exposed, and 3 international crime syndicates disrupted. Sarah turned to hug her brother. He'd stayed in town these past months, officially retired from active duty, but working with Rodriguez to help build a specialized task force. "How was court?" "Kane tried to make a deal," Michael said, accepting the coffee she offered. "Offered to expose his entire network in exchange for witness protection. Problem was, Ghost had already documented everything. Constantine broke first, gave up the whole Russian connection to save himself from extradition." They moved to the kitchen, where Sarah had case photos spread across the counter. The investigation had expanded far beyond their initial discovery, revealing trafficking operations in multiple states. What about the local fallout? "Police departments under federal oversight," Michael reported. "Rodriguez is acting chief while they clean house. The corrupt officers are facing charges, and her task force is coordinating with FBI to track down similar operations nationwide." Sarah pulled up news reports on her tablet. The case had made national headlines, exposing how trafficking organizations used legitimate businesses as cover. Private security companies across the country faced new scrutiny, and lawmakers were proposing stronger oversight measures. "Have you heard from Lisa?" Michael asked, watching Emma through the window. "She's doing well," Sarah smiled. "Her testimony helped convict Kane, and she's become an advocate for other survivors. The support group she started has helped dozens of girls recover and rebuild their lives." Michael nodded, but Sarah recognized the restless energy in his stance. "You're not staying, are you?" Ghost picked up chatter about similar operations in other cities, he admitted. Organizations like Kane's are adapting, finding new covers for their activities. Someone needs to hunt them. Before Sarah could respond, the doorbell rang. Detective Rodriguez stood on the porch, holding case files and wearing the weary expression of someone bearing complicated news. "Thought you should see this first," she said, spreading photos across the kitchen counter. Pattern matching from Ghost's analytics. 3 more cities showing similar signatures. Private security contracts, missing teenagers, corrupted local officials. Michael studied the data with practiced efficiency. They're learning from Kane's mistakes. Smaller operations, better compartmentalization, making it harder to spot the patterns. "But not impossible," Rodriguez noted. "We've got better tools now, know what to look for. The task force is building a national database, tracking suspicious contracts and disappearances." Sarah recognized the look passing between her brother and the detective. "You're going after them." "Someone has to," Michael said quietly. Kane's operation wasn't unique. There are others out there, predators getting smarter about hiding their hunting grounds. They need to learn there are consequences. Emma's laughter drifted in from outside, reminding them of exactly what they were fighting to protect. Sarah touched the silver locket around her daughter's neck, Michael's gift that now symbolized both danger and protection. "I'm going with you," Rodriguez announced. "The task force needs field operators who understand these organizations. We can coordinate with local law enforcement, build networks of trusted officials." "It's dangerous," Michael warned. "These organizations have resources, connections. They'll fight back." Rodriguez's smile held no humor. "Good. They should be afraid. We're not just law enforcement anymore. We're hunters, and they need to learn that some shadows bite back." Sarah studied the case files, her social worker's training helping her spot patterns. These girls all fit similar profiles, vulnerable, often from broken homes or foster care. The organizations are targeting specific demographics, using social media to identify potential victims. "They're evolving," Michael agreed. "Using technology, legitimate businesses, corrupted officials, building systems designed to hide in plain sight." "Then we evolve too," Rodriguez said firmly. "Ghost's analytics, combined with social services data and law enforcement networks. We build our own system, designed to expose and destroy these operations wherever they appear." Sarah recognized the mission taking shape, a continuation of the war they'd started here but on a larger scale. "You'll need support. Safe houses, documentation, places for rescued victims to recover." "Already working on it," Rodriguez confirmed. "Federal funding, private donors, survivor advocacy groups. We're building a complete infrastructure to not just rescue victims, but help them rebuild their lives." Michael's phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Ghost. The former SEAL studied the data, his expression hardening. "Got another one, Minnesota this time. Private security company just got contracts with 3 school districts, same pattern as Kane's initial setup." "When do we leave?" Rodriguez asked. "Tonight. Ghost has transport arranged." Michael turned to Sarah. "I need to know you and Emma will be safe." Sarah squeezed her brother's hand. "We are safe. You taught us to be strong, to fight back. Now go teach others to do the same." The afternoon sun painted long shadows across the kitchen as they finalized plans. Emma's laughter still floated in from outside, a reminder of innocence worth protecting. Sarah watched her brother and Rodriguez prepare for their next mission, understanding that the war they'd stumbled into would never truly end. There would always be predators, always be victims needing rescue. But now there were hunters too, operating in the shadows where trafficking networks thought they were safe. Building networks of their own, not for profit or power, but for justice and protection. Michael Mitchell had found a new mission, turning his combat skills toward a different kind of war. Later that evening, after Emma was asleep, Sarah stood with her brother in the driveway. The mountains loomed dark against the star-filled sky, and a cool breeze carried the promise of coming winter. "Stay in touch this time," she said, hugging him fiercely. "Let us know you're safe." Michael held his sister close, remembering the park confrontation that had started everything. "I will. And if you ever need me?" "I know," Sarah smiled. "The shadows will provide." She watched him drive away with Rodriguez, their vehicle disappearing into the night. In her office, the case files chronicled their victory over Kane's organization. But Sarah knew it was just the beginning. Somewhere in the darkness, other traffickers were building their networks, convinced their money and connections made them untouchable. They would learn otherwise, learn that some shadows held guardians instead of predators, learn why threatening the innocent meant facing the wrath of hunters who moved in darkness and struck without mercy. Sarah closed her laptop and checked on Emma one last time. Her daughter slept peacefully, the silver locket glinting in the moonlight. Outside, the night held its secrets, but no longer its terrors. The shadows had changed allegiance, becoming shelter instead of threat. In Minnesota, another operation was about to learn that lesson. Another group of traffickers would discover their sophisticated systems meant nothing against operators who specialized in impossible missions. Michael Mitchell had found his new war, and the predators who thought themselves safe in darkness were about to learn why some shadows should never be disturbed. The end. Epilogue. 1 year later, a small article appeared in various law enforcement bulletins. Joint Task Force reports significant disruption of trafficking networks in 12 states. Operations targeting minors through legitimate business fronts exposed and dismantled. Multiple arrests include corporate executives, security contractors, and corrupted officials. Task Force credits success to innovative analytics and rapid response teams. The article didn't mention the shadows that made it possible, didn't describe the operators who moved through darkness to protect the innocent. Some victories are better left unrecorded, measured only in lives saved and nightmares prevented. But in quiet communities across the country, corrupt officials grew nervous. Private security companies faced unexpected scrutiny, and organizations that preyed on the vulnerable learned to fear the dark, understanding too late that some shadows held teeth, and some hunters never stopped pursuing their prey. In Colorado, Sarah Mitchell watched her daughter play beneath mountain skies, knowing her brother's war continued. Each message from Michael or Rodriguez brought news of another operation exposed, another network dismantled. The predators evolved, found new hunting grounds, created better cover stories. But the shadows followed. And in the darkness, where trafficking networks thought themselves safe, hunters moved with lethal purpose. The war Michael Mitchell had stumbled into would never truly end. But he'd found his mission, teaching predators why some shadows should never be crossed. And somewhere in the night, Ghost's analytics tracked new patterns. Rodriguez's task force gathered evidence, and Michael Mitchell prepared to remind another trafficking operation why threatening the innocent meant facing the wrath of those who hunted evil in darkness. The shadows had changed sides, and the war continued.